sound and video.
All right, folks. Well, howdy, and welcome back to another week of Follow the Leader. This is your host, Lee Larson. I am honored with the privilege of hosting my guest this week. We have Dr. Kimeka G. Campbell out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you for having me. This is very nice.
Absolutely. Folks, you got to look at Dr. Campbell's resume. Kamika.org is where you can learn more about her. But Dr. Campbell has been working in activism and media for a while and has held significant leadership positions, including across sectors, which is fantastic. She has worked with young people of color in her local community of Greater Harrisburg, as well as ran a talk show. Black News Beat, which is how I found her on social media. Um, and then, I mean, just awards and honors. Like I'm scrolling. Unbelievable. Thank you for taking the time out of everything you're doing. Tell me, Doctor, what fuels you? Where is this passion coming from?
First, I want to say thank you. Like before any of that, I just want to say thank you for having me. This is very kind of you to just share your space with me. And it feels good to meet another person doing this very hard work of like deciphering all the things that are happening in our atmosphere, in the world, in the country. And I just want to say I'm a big fan. I'm very, very happy that you connected off of like a comment. Thank you for that. I appreciate that very much. So yeah. And that's part of what fuels me, right? I'm finding good people at every turn that I can connect with. And I think that beats it because you can get really caught up in a world where you are only ever experiencing the awful things that are happening. You only ever have to decipher them. You only ever have to try to tease through all that stuff. And it's very easy to get caught up in that. So being able to meet people like you, connect with folks like you who are doing important work, see where our work intersects, being in service to something greater than myself, ourselves, being in service of community is the fuel, right? And it's hard work. It's sometimes it's work, if I can be quite honest. Um, but it's really good work, and I that's why I keep sticking around doing it because it's good work, and good work is hard work. So
Yes. Good work is hard work is holy work. So thank you for your
right.
sacred work. Um, Tell me, so are you from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania? What was it like growing up? Um, what's your childhood? How is your family?
Yeah, so I am actually from Brooklyn, New York, by way of Trinidad and Tobago. I am a first generation American. My mother emigrated here about 6 years before I was born, and subsequently had me and my brothers. And I started my journey in Brooklyn, New York. Um, we moved from there when I was 7 years old, in the middle of the crack epidemic. Um, my mother wanted us to have a shot at life, and so we moved to Florida, which now seems like an oxymoron, or and the antithesis of what you want to do. Oxymoron, antithesis, whatever the word you want to use there. But now it seems really crazy, right? Like to say, well, I want to give my kids a shot at a better life, and so we're moving to Florida, to one of the reddest counties in Florida, Brevard County. It has been red for a very long time. So I grew up in a very conservative Caribbean household. My mom, she wasn't conservative like the standards we understand today, but she was a conservative, religiously conservative, fiscally conservative, all of that. And my first election, voting for um, uh, voting in the 2000 election. That's my very first election, and that just kind of gives you that's like a book ending of my childhood. That kind of gives you like kind of like the atmosphere. And being we were extremely religious. I went to church all the time, and that molded a lot of what I understood the world to be. And I had an existential crisis when I got into high school
Yeah.
because I was always rebellious,
Yeah.
mouthy, all the words they use for little girls who talk a lot, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was very strange out of body experience to be disconnected from my church in a pretty violent way too, because I went to a Pentecostal church,
Yeah.
and we did not wear pants, and we didn't wear makeup, and we didn't cut our hair and all these different things. And very legalistic, very much preach, and they don't minister, and they take care of the children. Very like this traditionalist scope. What we are now calling white nationalism, right? We are calling a lot of these tenets of this now, we're calling this white nationalism. When I was growing up listening to Dr. Dobson and Charles Stanley and all these other big names that we are now associating with white nationalism, we did not call it that. So growing up in that and looking back on that, my brothers and I are having conversations, like literally current conversations about how we grew up in white nationalism and did not have a clue. And we didn't know. We didn't understand what that meant. And we knew something was wrong. We knew that the messages were getting twisted as we got older. Right? When you're younger, the indoctrination looks very different. And when you're older, it's much more explicit rules as to how you are to behave as a woman and a man, how you are to behave as a Black person, how you are to behave as a gay person, how you are to behave, period. And these are things we are still reconciling, is what I would say there, right? And I definitely had a very two hard, difficult existential crises. About 16, 17, after I had been in the church my entire life. And then again, when I was going to grad school at 27, because I wasn't a Pentecostal anymore and I was in a non-denominational church, but white nationalist culture it is pervasive across denominations.
It is. Can you just the Pentecostal church that you're speaking of, was that a Black church or was that a white church what was that congregation like?
Oh, absolutely. So it was a white-led church that had a majority of the folks were from the Caribbean, Jamaican, Haitian, Bajan, Trinidadian like us, and there were some white folks there as well. It was a very interesting mix because we were in Palm Bay, Florida, again in this red county, Brevard County. When I say red, I mean voting conservative, voting for Republicans for most of my life. And this was an interesting makeup because inside of the church, you didn't really get these, they're explicit to me now is what I want to say, but you didn't get these explicit messages about racism. It was much more what God said that Black and white people shouldn't marry. What God said that, women couldn't minister. Well, God said all this stuff. And then when you go and look for where God said that, couldn't really find it. And I started realizing how off my church was from the Bible when I became a Bible quizzer, which is hilarious because they let us learn the Bible, which is crazy. I think if you really want to keep this going, you just encourage people not to read it. But anyhow, so we had a lot of Black and brown kids who were Bible quizzers and sang in the choir and were part of the music ministry because we were allowed to do that as Black and brown kids. Almost all of our pastors are white. I think we had one pastor, I think, in the entire time in the Pentecostal church that we were in that was not white. And they were part of the United Pentecostal Church International. This is a very well-established, long-running, grounded, got its roots in all kinds of communities across the international stage. So yeah, while it was a mixed congregation, the leadership was all white and very much putting out those messages to us about, what was acceptable, even though it was super racist. Now, now looking back.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for sharing so much on that because I recently came across a video and it was a turning point video of a young high school or college gal basically saying the fact that there's quote unquote Black churches is racist. And I was like, oh, she's onto something. She was trying to say like we're all coming back under together, and I was like, well, there's a history why they're there.
Yes, you're right, but you're wrong about why you're right.
Right. And so can you share about Black church history a little bit, unless that's not how you're
some of it is my wheelhouse. It's part of this I learned after I left the Pentecostal church and then after I left my non-denominational church too. And I'm not scared to name these churches. Brooklyn Tabernacle was a church was the more prominent church I left after I was done being a Pentecostal and tried to reconcile my faith and everything. And I admittedly did not go to a Black church until I got into college at all. Like, it wasn't, there were a couple of prominent Black churches in our neighborhoods, but that's not where we first landed. And so you kind of, when you land at a church, you kind of are sucked into that. So some of the history of the Black church, of course, starts with Black liberation theory, especially in the United States. Well, the history of the Black church goes way back to Africa and Christianity. I'm not going to bore everybody with with the whole history. Black liberation theology is a American conceptualization, not necessarily, I can't even say that. It is how we understand the United States. That's what I want to say. Black liberation theology and how you understand it in the United States actually has a long history around the world. But I am an American by way of Trinidad, but I'm an American. And the way that I've gotten to know it for me was through studying the civil rights movement and how Black liberation theology was at the forefront of not just, and that was the first way, not just, how I understand Black church now, but of how people got their rights, right? Like Martin Luther King was a preacher and extremely religious as well. And then before that, Black liberation theology. And so my first entree into understanding Black liberation theology came through understanding what the civil rights movement was. But then if this is how you're being introduced to it, your next kind of wondering, your inquiry is, well, what does this mean for slavery? How did Black people practice religions during slavery? And so starting to read about that and how folks use religion as a means to understand the freedom framework and how to achieve freedom, and how religious even folks like Harriet Tubman were in their endeavors for freedom. This has always painted for me a very, I can't even think of the word, but such a networked picture. A lot of folks think of these things separately for some reason, and it's not, no, that's the wrong word, not some reason. People think of these things separately because we're not taught the history. Right? These are not privileged histories in our country. I've read a passage by Dr. Sizemore, one of the more prolific Black historians in the country, that she talks about, well, what do you do with certain kinds of information, right? Particularly about Black people and Black history in this country. You ignore it, and by ignoring it, you chop it up into these pieces, right? So that is not understood in its totality. And Black liberation theory in the Black church is one of those histories that is just chopped up and bifurcated and kind of partially spoon-fed to people in one African-American history course in college at some point. And the only reason why I even got to know about some of these things and how it impacted my life was when I was an undergrad, I did an African-American psychology concentration within my psychology degree. I went dual enrollment at FAMU and Florida State. That African-American psychology concentration within the psychology degree really opened my eyes to how Indigenous ways of knowing guided Black and brown folks, particularly Black folks in this country, American Black ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of knowing. When we say Indigenous, we don't necessarily mean the first peoples of the United States. We're talking Indigenous to kind of the land, the place, Black people being here before some other population, before Columbus was here. There's so much to unpack, but we don't talk about Christopher Columbus finding America. We don't talk about the populations that existed here, in addition to the what we understand as like the Amerindians and Arawaks and all these other tribes. Like, there were a lot of people here. I could go on about this, but yeah, that's kind of where I landed with understanding how the Black church and Black liberation theology in particular shape my understanding of, one, how to get out of my church, which I thought was so wild, because once you start understanding like the revolutionary aspects of Black church, I couldn't stay at church anymore. It's crazy. And maintained a level of like spirituality, still do to this day, but it looks nothing like it did when I was I was younger and coming up in those other churches.
Well, and it's fascinating. I was reading an article recently that was talking about how whenever these big national surveys ask, whatever group they're asking, um, when specifically on religious demographics in the United States, this article was sharing, and I wish I had the author, but the questions they're asking are off because they tend to ask, like, are you religious? And a lot of folks say no, but that doesn't mean they're not spiritual. And this author of the article was trying to make the point, like, tarot decks are flying off the shelves. We've
Right.
got astrology, we've got meditation journals. Um, Women are getting lunar calendar cycle, like circle. Like, it's just there's this whole idea that religion is the only way
Yeah.
to have a faith, to have a relationship with a higher power, to be in community, to learn your values. I think religion is important and institutions are important for a lot of reasons, but they're so rigid. Um, and that rigidity makes it just so difficult to navigate. Share with us how you found yourself in Harrisburg. And let's
I found myself in Harrisburg because I like the boy. And the boy happened to be a Penn State graduate. He graduated from the College of Engineering, and um, we met on Penn State's campus. I was actually celebrating a friend of mine defending her dissertation, and we started hanging out. We liked each other. Boy likes girl, girl likes boy, and we were now like, well, now we're gonna start a life together. What are we gonna do? And so he was in Mechanicsburg, which is about 8.5, 10 miles from, depending on where you were going in Harrisburg, from Harrisburg. And was working at a plant there. And we decided after I graduated that we were going to move to Mechanicsburg because he already had a job, started looking at houses together. Little did we know, right down the street, there was Harrisburg. So Mechanicsburg is very white.
Hmm.
Like the Black population there was like 0.3% or something insanely low, like very low. I think maybe now it's up to like 2%, but it was very low when we moved there. We were the only Black folks in our neighborhood, save one judge who had been there the entire time. Over the course of time, one other Black person moved in and moved out. We have since left. But what we didn't know that Harrisburg was right down the street. And Harrisburg is 78% Black and Hispanic, and it is the capital of the state. Now, I knew it was the capital of Pennsylvania, but I had no idea that it was a third class city, excuse me, and that it was 78% Black and Hispanic. I had no clue. 70% BIPOC, that is almost all of the different tribes. Like we're sitting on the Susquehannock and the Lenape lands, right? There are folks who speak over 100 different languages in our geographic Harrisburg City proper and all this stuff. We found it because we were looking for community. We found Harrisburg because we were looking for other Black people. We were looking for Black professionals, and we wanted to know what they were doing. We were like, "What are y'all doing? That's fun. Are there any points of like commonality that we share that we can commiserate around?" And we found a lot of that. We were like, most of the folks who we met were like, "How are y'all surviving here? Why are you in Mechanicsburg?" We were like, why are you out there? We're like, that's what we felt like. His husband was trying to move close to work. He wanted to be in walking distance of his job. He had lived 30 minutes from his job for most of his career and wanted a chance to walk to work within 30 to 40 minutes. Because he's also insane. I'm always like, so you're going to get up and take a 45-minute walk every day in both directions? That's crazy. But that's what he wanted to do. Or bike. And so we were privileging those kinds of things, but what we found that we needed was community. And we were not getting that where we were. It was very antagonistic. We actually ended up moving because they kept calling the police on us because our dogs were black. And we then found out how racist the judicial system is because they allowed the neighbor to call him like, a Muslim name that was not his name. for the entirety of this trial over a parking a ticket that they gave him for the dogs barking. And when he pointed it out, they basically were like, well, she just made a mistake. She's like, no, she was calling me a totally different name. So this was a catalyst for us getting out of there and moving towards moving into Harrisburg. We had gotten the property to previously so that we could have a community house for young professionals of color. My husband and I are both founders of young professionals of color. And we did not live there, we just had a community house. And then at one point, something snapped, and I was like, I gotta get out of here before I am on the news with these crazy people. I'm not gonna allow them to make me crazy. So we moved into Harrisburg officially 2 years ago. Mind you, we've been in the area for 14, 15 years. So officially moved in 2 years ago. And it's probably the best decision we've ever made. Being in community, being in walking distance to most people in our community, and most of our investment and community investment, we invested a lot of time and money into the community. And we were 8 miles, doesn't seem like a long ways away, but we didn't realize how far away we were from that investment. And even in understanding something about being in place and space. I'm also a place and space researcher. Something about being in the place and space of the community that you say you are serving is very different than living even 8 miles away from it. And there were people that appreciated us being on the West Shore. They appreciated us being there because we were a very welcome presence for a lot of folks of color on the West Shore that's in the Harrisburg. But there's just something different about being in Harrisburg after starting an organization here, after doing all these really cool things. Something about being here just makes it amazing.
And just looking on your young peoples of color, these workshops that you started leading and the largest Emancipation Day event.
Yeah.
What are you hoping that these young folks are learning when they go through your workshops?
Yeah. So we have been really successful with joining with other community entities, Market Square Presbyterian Church, Harrisburg University, Harrisburg Area Community College, and others. And these are really interesting and long-standing institutions in our community, right? So we've been really successful in joining with them to have these offerings. And what folks have been learning at least the stuff that we have been doing, what they've been learning is, one, the importance of mapping Pennsylvania and attaching Pennsylvania to the national landscape of emancipation. A lot of folks don't realize that partial abolition started in Pennsylvania. It's how New York, Jersey, and other states around us got their models for partial abolition. And it was funny because it's so hilarious because they quickly moved away from partial abolition and were like, no, actually, we need total abolition. But it was a slow walk. We start the 800-year march towards freedom that ends in Galveston, Texas, right? We started here in 1780, and it ends in Galveston, Texas in 1865. And the colored troops here were the ones who helped. Actually, it's so interesting. Had a parade here in Harrisburg. I'm sitting at the Broadway Market right now. Here in Harrisburg, there was a parade to celebrate the actual end of slavery and Pennsylvania's involvement in that. So there's these bookends to that we want people to know. And I've been spending the last 8 or 9 years of my life helping people situate, after I understood the history, helping people situate Harrisburg and Pennsylvania in that national landscape. And talking about what the main drivers of slavery was. The main drivers of slavery was economic. It was economic driver, right? Slavery wasn't one of the economic drivers. It wasn't a partial economic driver. Slavery was the economic driver that helped, one, build the United States to what we understand it today, the roads, the cities, but also the economic prowess that slave owners are calling companies today, like Aetna. Aetna dealt in insurance policies that insured slaves in the early days. Yeah, honey, we have the Civil War Museum here, and they have the policies sitting in a protected drawer to preserve that history. Oh yes. So
writing that down.
So when we talk about situating, so when I'm talking about what I want people to learn, I want them to know more than anything in these workshops. And we actually uncovered this with the Market Square Church. I had been teaching this stuff and kind of like grasping at straws. Like, I'm not from here, but the people who are from here also didn't know. And so we're all trying to learn together the importance of Harrisburg in this landscape. There were two revolts regarding slavery in 1825 and 1850 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's crazy. We have the courthouse. What is particularly Harrisburg, and you're only 40 miles away from the Mason-Dixon line. 40 miles. People think of the Mason-Dixon line as the deep south. It is not.
No.
It is not. And what would happen was people would cross into Harrisburg as a way to try to get to different spots because there was a stop on the Underground Railroad here, and we had a very well connected and networked Black community here at that time. Particularly by 1825. However, partial abolition started in Pennsylvania in the 1780s. 45 years later, when you look at 1780 Harrisburg and 1825 Harrisburg, the population almost flips. It used to be all white, and then as emancipation is literally slowly rolling in, it's flipping. So really helping folks understand helping folks understand how churches like Market Square Church were at the forefront of abolitionist movement. It was a Presbyterian church, and what it meant for Presbyterian, a Presbyterian outfit like Market Square Church should be going against the brother of the founder of Harrisburg, right? Who was very much about repatriation and yeah, sure, we can end slavery, but they also need to get out of here. Going against him specifically, it's a very wild, crazy, amazing history that people know nothing about. So
No, and it makes sense. I didn't get up to Pennsylvania, but I did go to Harper's Ferry, and because that's not far from Harrisburg. I mean, and that makes sense too. And you're right. The South has really has a different morph in the name, but yeah, it was up there. I mean, Virginia, you're looking at the maps, pretty far up there.
that's right.
So what is considered the South in American history, folks, is so. Um, but and even to your point about slavery being so institutionalized that companies had insurance policies on this, like this again, this idea that like, oh, just some bad people had slave, or whatever it was, like, no, this is systemic. Furthermore, in places outright literacy was banned
Right.
for those who were enslaved. Those who did were able to access some sort of education, had separate schoolhouses or separate books. Um, this is systemic. So, thank you for your example of Etna and for that. What are your goals? We're wrapping up 2025. What are your goals for 2026 and your advocacy with either YPOC or Black Newsbeat? Where are you headed?
I have no idea. And I do this, I plan every year. So for me to say I have no idea is a bit of a like, I don't know what 2026 feels like. We're right now in the midst of planning Juneteenth. And, one of the goals is to keep Juneteenth in this climate of anti-DEI, keep it as a learning opportunity for people to understand Pennsylvania's place in this landscape, right? And I think this is something that I cannot take for granted. So that's one of my goals. My other goal is to personally is to keep working to elect Black and Brown candidates when they kick people out of at the rate they're kicking Black women out the workforce, at the rate they're doing all these things. My next best move is to help them run for office and make sure that they're getting in at every level. One of my greatest triumphs from this past November is the fact that Moms for Liberty won none of their elections around the country. Not one. It's great, or at least not in Pennsylvania. And this is important to me because they have been quietly taking over school boards across the nation. Getting some sense back into our school boards, some de-radicalizing some of it is really important, even though they think we're the radicals. It's a whole other thing. This is very important. Watching actually the borough of Mechanicsburg come out strongly against the KKK. Like, those are the kinds of things we want to elect leaders and elect folks who are going to protect the entire of our residents and our societies, and not just, I don't know, push these weird false narratives about, you know, church and state and how it's not really separate and all these different things. Like, that's part of the goal. And then I think the last goal is, and I, as an activist, you know, I've been coined an activist. It's a word that I have a problem with, because, I mean, what is an activist? Like, I just want good for my neighbors and my friends. Why is that activism? I don't know. Like, I want the best for them. So in parts of that, I want to be more strategic about whatever that is. If I don't like the word activism, what am I doing? I want to be more strategic about it, because we have the tough times. We have not hit rock bottom as a country. People are like, oh, white nationalism is in the death throes. It may be, but, you know, it can take a lot of people out as it's going down. But it will go down. And I'm happy to have the clear head on that. Like, I can see there's a light at the tunnel. You have to do the work now. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. You got to do the work right now. And so one of the goals is to be more strategic about that work. In the midst of this, like, me, they're anti-me, right? I am considered DEI. So how are you going to be strategic in the middle of that? And a lot of the state grants and federal grants that you're seeing, the government overreaches and saying, like, they talked about all small government, no, you know, government should be in states' business, only to have the worst state overreach or federal overreach into the states that I've seen ever. So being strategic in that work, you know, I just read ProPublica just did a really great like interactive article series on how organizations are taking DEI, nonprofits are thousands taking DEI out of their framework, because they know they're not going to get money for that, right? They know the federal government is going to not give them that. They're not going to fund their work. So how are you being more strategic? Because I'm not giving up my values. I'm not doing what those other organizations are going to do. So how do I do that? Because I'm not compromising on those points. So it's going to be an interesting year. And also just continuing to rest. I did a lot of resting this year on purpose. I was getting so stressed watching the news, so stressed trying to make sense of it all, so stressed about what's going to happen with Black POC, so stressed. And then finally I just had to, you know, it's going to be what it's going to be. Are you going to compromise your morals? You're not. You already know you're not. So you gotta take a nap. You gotta go sleep.
Right.
You gotta do that so you can live to fight another day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I think about that too, like just how much effort goes into something that you may not see the fruits of in your lifetime. And that's why it has to be bigger than us. And why community is important, rest is important, having some sort of spiritual or holistic practice, those type things.
Oh yeah.
What does, in all of your advocacy and all of just your involvement, what does, you spoke on rest, what does that look like? Rejuvenation, maybe, not so much rest.
Right. Definitely rejuvenation. It is the first thing that I do is the antithesis of everything that people think about when they think about a busy person like me and things that I do. I am busy laying in bed. I will take extra time where I can to lay in bed under soft lighting and read a book and pull the curtains and not entertain anything, right? People, we couldn't reach you for 2 hours. You're right, because I was in my bed reading a book, decompressing from a week of, or even sometimes it's every couple of days. Like, I went to PA Society weekend last weekend, which just happens in New York, and they do it there so they can raise a limited amount of money supporting to these campaigns. Okay, so that's what it's for. And it was so high in your face energy, and I needed to go because I want to make sure that I'm, you know, in the know about certain things. But I had to come back home. I had to decompress. I had to sit in bed. I had to read. and kind of like recenter myself. I got a split headache Monday morning too, just from being out all weekend. But it was being more intentional about rest in that specific way has helped me. Like, it's okay to just lay in bed a little while longer instead of like feeling bad that I did that, and feel like I
Mm,
need to be busy in that. They paid for
mm,
to the things that I do effectively. Like, I have less time to like do busy work, if that makes sense, because I am resting.
yeah,
And I, for
right.
example, like right now, this is a little personal, but I'm going through menopause very early. I'm only
Mm.
44, I'll be 45 in April. And because of that, I am up. This never happened to me before I got to perimenopause. I am up every night around or 12 so I can sleep. Because I get up, I write, I schedule emails to send, I do a lot of things, and I block my calendar. I'm like, if I'm up, that means I'm going to be tired tomorrow. I'm not going to be of no use to anybody. So I still need to get that sleep. So I've been really being more intentional about that. And just rest overall. My friends have remarked, "Oh, you're not outside. You're not everywhere as much as you used to be." Yes, because I'm resting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm resting. Enjoying my dogs. I am sitting on my deck if it's summertime. Y'all come sit on deck with me, but I'm gonna be on this deck enjoying my house, making spaces in the house, restful spaces, just things like that. It's been super.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly glad that you have that ritual set up for yourself because it's a journey. It's
It really
and
is.
it's just you think you've crossed a mountain and then you're just yeah, it's a false peak. You're like, what? I thought we were doing something. Um, one of the things that I think about, you mentioned Christian nationalism earlier. Um, one of the things I think about is the strength of the United States in our religious plurality. Um, and really how all these different faith groups with all the immigrants, because that is the backbone of this country, are coming in, they're bringing their faiths, and through all these different faiths and freedoms, women had power in certain churches and certain faith traditions, and I think about how that has led to I think about how these Christian nationalisms, folks really do want this single way of being able to access God. Who gets to be um, a mouthpiece for God?
Yeah,
And I think about, as you mentioned, and the Underground Railroad, or how Harriet Tubman, these faiths, how God has, at least in my interpretation, I believe that God empowers particularly women to speak and to speak out against injustices against the community. Um, how how are you seeing faith in the Black community, particularly in your region? How is that playing a role in how they're handling contemporary political issues, headlines, etc.?
yeah. Um, I am proud to be in an area where Black churches are not only. I'm thinking like Greater Zion. I'm thinking I'm thinking of these churches in the region who are meeting the moment by using the Bible in the way that Black liberation theologians did back in the day. Catholic liberation theology uh, scholars and ministers did back in the day, and it's very interesting to see them meeting this moment that way and giving their parishioners that hope, and not just that hope, but the strategy to persist in a time where you have to clearly say, you know, this is what they're doing is not only not in concert with the Bible, but it's not in concert with how we create community, sustain community, and live. Like we're they're making the case from what I can see of being a servant, a servant that is not ashamed and can a workman that is not ashamed and can rightly divide the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2:15. Um, I think they are parsing the word in a way that gives their parishioners hope in a landscape that is clearly trying to erase the experiences of Black and Brown people in the country, and also erase what they're seeing as racism against white people in the church and in the country, which, you know, it's a bunch of convoluted nonsense when they start talking about that. But the Black church, from what I've seen, and not everyone, some people are terrified, and some people are believers. They believe in what the more conservative folks. Some people believe in what the country is doing, and they are acting as tokens within that system, that if they comply with some of this stuff in advance, that they're going to keep getting money, they're going to keep getting dollars, they're going to keep the favor of people, and they're not going to be persecuted. But as we all know, tokens get spent. So their day is coming, and I try not to pay too much attention to it, except to make sure people know the differences. But a lot more of the churches in our region are stepping up to the plate. They're taking care of their communities. They're joining with other churches they're joining with the churches outside of their denominations. Christian Churches United, for example, is an amazing organization in our region. Not without its challenges, but an amazing organization in our region that joins churches together to do really important work, work with and help the unhoused, to stand up to racist regimes and tactics, to feed people in the community. I mean, organizations like that are the reason why I think churches are coming to, especially minority churches, coming together right now in a way that is not seen in the wider church landscape, where people are leaving other kinds of churches at the highest rates. I think church attendance in our country is the lowest it's been in a generation. And that's important because the church is not serving a lot of people. So these churches are, and it is evidenced by the fact that people are flocking to them in this very difficult time. Whether they are meeting a need by sowing a seed of a meal or clothing or community, just a space for community people to be, that feels like a safe haven. So that's how I see the churches in our region, particularly Black and Brown churches, because we're a mostly Black and Hispanic city. That's how I see them stepping up. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And that's a great segue to go right into Vice President Kamala Harris. We've got some rumors, not an official announcement, but some rumors of running again. It looks like she's either created or registered or affiliated with a PAC. Talk to me. Do you want to talk about her race, her book, her race for president, her book, or do you want to talk about the future? It's up to you.
So I think all of it is pertinent to the future. So, you know, full disclosure, I was the regional South Central Pennsylvania regional political director on the campaign, and in this past year, and I started in Harris, and we moved to Harris Walls. And the first thing I want to say is, and this is very controversial and something I'm thinking about, but I don't think Joe Biden did her any favors by throwing her to the wolves in the fashion that he did. Now, I'm not saying she didn't have any agency in it, but I think it was a damned if he did and damned if he didn't situation. It is well known in 2020 that a lot of reasons why people voted, especially Black women, for Biden-Harris ticket was because, and a lot of women too, it was with the clear knowledge that then Vice President, then Senator Kamala Harris, Senator's Vice President, would be on the ticket in 2024. So when that didn't happen, there was a lot of grumblings, and there was a lot of issues within the party, particularly with Black women, because and it was kind of like justified, because they're like, well, she's not having people aren't responding to her very well as Vice President, and so we're just gonna burn Joe Biden again. It was basically what was happening. And also, by the time Joe Biden had decided he was going to run again, he had made some major strides in student loan forgiveness and other things that I think they were banking on running on. So when the disastrous debate happened on June the 27th, I'll never forget that day, the immediate talk was who was going to take over the ticket immediately, not an hour later. After that debate, people were like, well, he's got to drop out. Who's going to take over? Gavin Newsom was named of California, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and a couple other names. They were throwing around J.B. Pritzker, Andy Beshear. They were throwing on all kinds of names, and none of those names included Kamala Harris. So I think that was the first issue. Like, she wasn't even a consideration for folks. Outfits like Women with Black Women and a couple other folks, Joteka Edie and a couple others, they immediately began organizing around her becoming the nominee. And I think, and it was with the past idea that it was supposed to be her anyway. It was supposed to be her in 2024 anyhow. It was Joe Biden was going to be a one-term president. We're having Kamala Harris in 2024. We're cultivating Kamala Harris for 2024. That did not happen. So now we got folks organizing for her to be the nominee because folks felt like she was rightfully on that track, but was not cultivated. And then the announcement comes that Joe Biden is stepping down, right? And he's coming off the ticket, and he immediately endorses Kamala Harris. Now she has got to go through the process. It wasn't a done deal. That was an endorsement. Now she got to go through the process of getting all of the DNC votes. She's got to do all of it. She's got to get basically every state to endorse her. Every state Democratic Party of the states. And so this is this process that I think people don't understand was a hard fought process. They looked at it as like she was just handed this, and people wrote her off. They did. And there was a lot of internal grumblings. A lot of people on the campaign quiet quitted. I won't name any names, but they did. They quiet quitted. And we saw that come out in places like North Carolina from folks who were from Pennsylvania who laughed at us when we lost and said, and that's why I voted for Trump. And these people working on the campaign. And these stories, especially the Black collective, we told these stories. We told these stories, and we wanted to internally. We didn't go to the news or anything. Some people went to this, but we told these stories internally because we wanted people to understand the landscape of what happened, especially for the Black and brown folks of the campaign. The amount of racism that we endured in this campaign, the amount of sexism we endured in these campaigns, these things were universal experiences across all the battleground states and many other states. And listening to my folks across these different, my peers across these different state parties and state efforts to help Kamala Harris win, helped me understand why she didn't, why she was unsuccessful in 107 days. Was she ever going to be successful? I don't know. But I know from what I saw and understanding some of the internal stuff, there ain't no way. To quote, I did a study. I could go on about this. So I did a study at the end of the campaign on Pennsylvania campaign workers, and I wanted to see how they were feeling, right? And I was like, how do you feel? Like, what's going on with you? And I had the survey, sent it out. I got about 110 people to fill it out. And it was much more in depth than how do you feel? But that was the thrust, that was the crux of it. How are y'all feeling? Because that was crazy times we went through. And one of the quotes was, I am dead inside, and I memorized it on purpose, because imagine going to work every day and working with people who hated your name and hated that she was a Black, and were in some of the highest levels of this operation. And I read that, and not only did it resonate with me, but it made me so sad for Kamala and for Black women who do, people think we're handed things, but we're not, and who do so much to serve and to do the thing. Kamala has her issues. Nobody's a perfect candidate. Any Democratic candidate who cannot speak, for example, squarely on the face about what was happening in Gaza and the genocide happening there is always going to get pushed back from me. But at the same time, they never gave Kamala a fighting chance to even show how she would lead on an issue like that, right? They just wrote her off at the beginning. So all these things were flying around in my mind when there's a call a couple months ago, and it's like, keep in touch, all of you who worked with us, keep in touch, right? So that was the first thing that got my gears turning. We knew the book was coming. We were all waiting patiently for that book drop. It confirmed a lot of things we thought. I saw her distancing herself a little bit from Biden, which means to me, she might run again. Right? And it also explained a lot. The Josh Shapiro story was very interesting because he's our governor of Pennsylvania. And I'm sitting there going, this feels like another run. That's what it felt like. Then the PAC email came for those of us who were on, the other PAC emails. So we got that automatically. And it feels like she's going to run. But she has not announced anything, and she won't for a while. But people are already crowning Gavin Newsom as the nominee, and we are years away from that. And I had a friend talk with my friend about this just yesterday, and I don't think people understand what a feat Kamala did in 107 days. That they just don't get it. They don't get the intense pressure that she was under to save the republic. Truly, literally, especially experience what we have now. And people to this day are still arguing. I mean, they're protesting at her book tour stops. They are treating her like she's still responsible for the country when she is literally a private citizen right now. She may or may not be a candidate again, but I just think the amount of vitriol she still gets that doesn't seem directed at Trump, from my perspective, it's outsized. And I don't know personally if she has to experience that again. She's a warrior. She's a fighter. I personally wouldn't do it. I wouldn't. But she's a warrior and a fighter. And if I had to guess, I'm guessing I don't know, we might get an announcement of that in the future. But I'm also trying to respect the fact that she's a private citizen trying to do what others have done, which is talk about her experiences, lead in the ways that she can. She's been supporting a lot of candidates around the country. I got to see her speak at Congressional Black Caucus in September. And she was fired than she ever was in the campaign. And what I will say is, it's hard to find your footing in 107 days and find your voice. But I think this book tour is going to help her. And if she sounds anything like she did at Congressional Black Caucus, I think she took the time, rested, and is not coming back out swinging proverbially. And I think that's going to help her a lot if she decides to run. I know that was long, but you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. But no, thank you for that. That was fantastic. That just to hear you flesh that out, hear what the communications are happening, the stories. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen? Like, but I am so thankful. Thank you for giving me your time today. I know we went over. I know this is on your Zoom. If you don't mind, this is such a great call. I'm glad we have this relationship and we can support
Right?
each other from across the country. Um, yes, anytime I can host you out here in Montana, I would love to, and I
And I
hope.
Black Newsbeat. I just interviewed Akbar Ali, the youngest. He got sworn in today. I interviewed him yesterday. The youngest state rep in Georgia. He won a special election, and he is the youngest, and I think the youngest and either first Muslim rep there in the district. So he is youngest in the state, I think youngest in the nation, and first Muslim rep in that seat. And so all that to say, I have folks come on all the time who are like from other places, and I would love to have if you are soon.
Absolutely. I would love that. All right. Well, thank you, folks, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Kimeka G. Campbell, for joining us on another week of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. But wait, don't leave yet, because Dr. Campbell, please, how can the audience reach you?
Oh my gosh, yes. We are at Black News Beat on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. We are also on YouTube at Black News Beat. We are on LinkedIn, Kimeka Campbell on LinkedIn. We broadcast the show to all those channels. I'm on TikTok personally as Kajarine, and you can inbox me on any of those sites. Somebody will answer. We have a small team working through messages because we get a lot of hate mail because when we talk about and hate messages and hate DMs. But you can reach me. Somebody will answer, and we will try to collab or do some good work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you,
Thank you.
folks. All right, that's Follow the Leader. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.